Good evening, good morning, wherever you find yourself at the time of day or evening. This is Purple Points, and we are back with another solid session. And joining me today is none other than my brother from another mother, Professor Kalvin Harvell of Henry Ford College. He is a sociology professor. He's also the advisor to the African American Association there. So I'm very excited and delighted to have Professor Harvell here with us today in Purple Points. How you doing there, Brother Calvin?
Brother, I'm doing exceptionally well. How are you?
I can't complain. I can't complain. So, delighted to have you here, brother, and let's jump right into it. So typically I start this off with the same question. So I want to pose that question to you, sir, and that is, what comes to mind when you think of the color purple?
When I think of the color purple, for me, I saw the movie first prior to reading the book. When the movie and book both came out, I was extremely young. Okay? And so when I think of the movie first, what comes to my mind, brother, is confusion. I would remember sitting in the movie theater and just being somewhat confused about some of the things that were going on in the film. Particularly one of the first scenes where the Celi's having a child, and then her father's coming and taking this child away from her, and not taking the child somewhere to wipe the child off or the child was ill, but literally taking the child, and the child is going to be gone forever. And then the whole notion of, we find out later who the child was, right? So it was you have Celi and her father or stepfather, and this was very confusing to me. And then of course some of the other levels of confusion were these relationships that these sisters were having with Black males. This did not speak to my reality, and at a very young age, if it doesn't speak to your reality, in terms of your own lived experience, you're completely lost. In my young age at that time, all I had saw were these healthy Black relationships, particularly my own mother and father. And so watching dad and his interactions with mom, and watching mom and her interactions with dad, this was just unheard of. And so there was this, for me, the movie, this may sound bad, but at that young age, the movie was like watching a Star Wars film. This is something that is not real, so there's this whole notion, there is no real Jedis, and there are no Sith Lords, and there are no lightsabers. I wanted one. I wanted to be a Sith Lord, but my mom had to tell me, look, there is no training where you're going to be able to do this thing. So again, confusion, I think, is the very best words to describe my initial reaction to when you say the color purple, and recalling when I initially saw that particular film.
Okay. Yeah, brother, I think we're on the same page. When I saw it, young age, and just didn't understand, but I recognized there were a lot of Black women in the audience. Not only when we went to the movie, we're actually sitting in the theater, but before you go to a big premiere, there are people getting popcorn and standing around talking, and I just remember I don't think I had ever seen that many Black women. We're talking church functions, we're talking family reunions. I don't think I'd ever seen that many Black women of different, just life experiences all in one space, brother. So, there were church going women, they had their hats and whatnot. You had younger women, you had women who looked to be, going out with their sister circle. But at the time, brother, like you, I was very young, and I didn't know anything about the movie other than my mom had a book with the same title, and there were all these Black women in the audience. So I just, I knew it was significant. I had no idea what was significant about it, just that a lot of Black women showed up. So I figured, okay, this must be important. So obviously, brother, you encountered the film again, and perhaps the book. I'm assuming you read the book already, but
Oh, yes, sir.
What was that like? The difference between that first sort of confusion and when you had a little bit more, I guess, connection with some of the themes that were happening in the film. And if you could speak to what it was like seeing the film, having read the book.
Right, brother. It's interesting, if you don't mind, when you talked about when you went to see the film, and these Black women were there in these monstrous numbers. It's interesting where I'm from. There was no movie theater in my actual city. So we actually had to go out to another city. And so what was interesting is that there were predominantly white individuals in the movie theater. And so I don't have it. So hearing your experience and this discourse of there were these Black women and the meaning that we attach to what does, as children, what does it mean when we see all these sisters here, when we see our elders here? I don't have that. I had my mom and dad. And I recall at the end of the movie, my elementary school principal was there. He was a white gentleman and his family, and they introduced us and everything. But so it's just interesting, just somewhat recalling that now. But in terms of getting older and finally reading this particular text, and it's interesting, brother, because I think for me, I seen the movie and understood it in 4 stages. I read the text, I think 2 or 3 times now, and at the same time have understood it, I think, in stages. So movie and reading the book. And my mom I remember her always saying, listen, read the book first, because you're missing something in terms of the film. And when you're young, you say, okay, sure, mom, sure. I'm going to just still do my thing, right? The book is too long. He has time for all that. I'm trying to get to, and it's going to somewhat date how old I am, brother. I'm trying to go back and play my Atari system, And so, and I mean the first one, brother. I don't mean the 2600 or whatever that was, And so I don't have time for reading any types of books. And so literally by the time that I read the book and then seen the movie, this was when I was in college, had a few more experiences. And by this time, I had begun to see unhealthy relationships. I had not saw these things when I was a child. And so being able to then see the movie again, I said, okay, this makes sense. It does not speak to my reality, but it certainly does speak to a lived reality of other people, and not just black individuals, but other people in general. But then being able to read the book, and I begin to realize, and I was so grateful to my mother for again being on me and stressing this notion of reading the book. That's when I begin to realize how much I had actually missed from this particular film. How much the film did not go coincide with the actual book, how much the film missed and how much the film left out. And of course, I do have to, in my mind, I have to remember, well, it's a film, it's Hollywood. They're trying to earn money. And to earn money, you always can't, you have to show that which is the most exotic, that which is the most sexy, the most exciting for people. And so to sit there and read that book, there's no way that they were going to pull some of the things out of the book and then be able to transfer that to the screen properly, or pull certain things out the book and then be able to transfer it to the screen and still make millions of dollars. And so once I was able to become older, again, and as I said, I think I read and saw it in 4 different stages. So by the time I was in college, and I'm studying sociology, so all of a sudden everything has this greater meaning for me, and I'm understanding, conflict theory and symbolic interaction, and trying to really come into my own. This is still when I'm an undergraduate still, but I'm trying to somewhat come into my own. At that point, the movie began to have a different meaning for me, and particularly seeing these unhealthy relationships, particularly the abuse that was going on. Again, throughout the movie between Celie and Mr. became very profound for me. At this stage, I was also going through what I call my what I was developing into my nationalism, and I was getting an understanding of what nationalism meant. And I was running in certain circles where the nationalism was complete with sexism. And so again, at this young age, I'm thinking I'm this nationalist and we're pro-black, etc. But at the same time was engaging with, I don't want to say I was engaging, I was dealing with and encountering a great deal of sexism and still trying to navigate my own sexism and know who I was as a man. And the one thing that I think really prevented me from holding strong to this level of sexism, again, is because of the healthy relationship that I saw between my own mother and father. And particularly, my father, I think when I reflect on the film, and again, I see these emasculated men. I see these men who are very abusive. They seem like they don't have their only space is to be abusive to black women. And then I think about my father and his love and his appreciation and his concern and commitment to my mother. And it still makes me step back and say, again, although this is a reality for some, not a reality for me. And so during that second phase of my life, I was still trying to negotiate what this means. Had not saw it, knew that it existed, but what's still going on with this thing? Okay.
Okay.
And then I think my third phase, and this again coming into my nationalism, it was a very interesting lecture given by Louis Farrakhan many, many years ago about the color purple. And again, in the circles that I was running, you know, the critique was extremely interesting, particularly of the black man. I remember one thing that he said, and this always stands out to me. And it wasn't until years later when I was able to seriously and critically critique this thing. He says that men have the responsibility for the upkeep of the woman. And, you know, as a young man, you know, 19, 20 years old, I said, yeah, men have the responsibility for upkeep of the woman. And he goes on, but this whole upkeep, there becomes this whole sexist discourse as to what the upkeep actually meant. You know, women were basically nothing more than tall children. And so, they need to be taken care of. They need to be looked after. And when I say looked after and take care of, I don't mean in a compassionate way, but I mean in a way that they don't know what's best for them. You know, almost some of the literature that you get from the enslavement period in the so-called United States, where you have, you know, the benevolence of whites is what essentially made them enslave black folks. They were trying to save black folk for something, you know, trying to save black folks from something. And so there was this notion of, okay, well, this person is enslaved because I'm protecting them. They would not know how to go off and do anything for themselves. And so when I have to give this person this beating, it's not because I'm a bad person, but it's because I'm doing what's best for them. Who is that? Lawrence Kohlberg talks about the notion of punishment leads to obedience, right? Children don't really know why they're supposed to carry out socially acceptable behaviors. All they know is that when they don't, they get punished for it. And so they never really learn why they're not, you know, sticking scissors into the electrical circuit or drinking bleach. All they ever learn is, if I do this, somebody's going to smack my hand. And so when I remember sitting in that particular lecture and picking this up and saying, yes, women do need to be taken care of, because again, they're nothing more than tall children. Now, I'm happy to report that I have since moved away from that particular stage. Again, you know, I don't want to say, well, look, I was young and so that was it. You know, I still need to take some responsibility for this thing. But as I've gotten older and really coming into contact with strong sisters and dealing with strong sisters, you know, a strong sister will make you get your thing right, you know. And so we're dealing with some of those strong sisters. I was able to somewhat move away from those particular ideologies. And then with my fourth, and I hope I'm not going too long here, brother.
Not at all.
My fourth, I think, phase, and this is the phase where I'm at right now. And my fourth phase, and I always call this my fatherhood phase. When I became a father, all of a sudden, everything changed. Everything that I thought began to change. The way that I began to perceive reality began to change, because now all of a sudden I have this person who I'm responsible for. And I believe this is my most important task for my entire life. Everything else is cute. I thought I was doing some serious work. You know, I thought my teaching was, and again, I'm not saying my teaching is not, but I thought my teaching was this serious work. And I'm this hardcore scholar, and I know so much. I studied so much, and I've done all these things. But then it was just this piece that, wow, this is a person I've been entrusted with. And I'm supposed to make sure this person is going to be taken care of, you know? And so now, again, looking at some of those unhealthy relationships that were going on, the level of abuse, and both, you know, physical and emotional abuse that was happening in those movies. And I think about, you know, what does this mean if my child now is going to see this? And when I say child, I'm talking about a daughter, you know? And so what does this now mean? I see these men who are abusive to their daughters, abusive to the women in these films. And so now in my fatherhood stage, everything now is centered on my daughter. And so seeing the movie again, in fact, her and I watched it together. And at first I was thinking, I can't let her watch this particular film because there's some things in this film that are inappropriate. And I'm one of those dads that still use the fast forward button when I know a scene is coming up that she doesn't need to essentially see. Or I'll say, well, you know, baby, let us run upstairs for a second and do something. And then I've already pushed the button so I can get past that thing. So I fast forward through a couple of things, but then talking to her and getting her idea and now seeing the movie through her eyes has also given me a different perspective of what the film actually means. And again, understanding, trying to make sure now that I'm going to not reproduce these types of relationships that I saw within that particular film.
Wow. I mean, you got quite a few nuggets there, brother, that I wanted to kind of go back and deal with a little bit.
Yes,
The
sir.
first thing I was interested in is just the world of experience, because sometimes perception is reality.
Hmm.
So I remember when you were talking about your experience of going to see the film and what it's like to watch a film in a predominantly white audience versus my first encounter in a predominantly black audience. And there's, typically when you go see a film with a black audience, a conscious black audience, the way that the film uh, talks and the way that the audience talks to the film is a lot different than when you're in a predominantly white audience. So
Indeed.
I'm sure that experience, that extra theater, we'll call it the extra theater.
Indeed.
That experience is like almost another film in and of itself. The conversations that people have with each other in response to a character. So when Mister is, abusive to Celie, you hear sisters in the audience say it's time to go, or
Mm.
the scene at the dinner table during Thanksgiving when she's like, I've had enough and I'm
Hmm.
out.
Oh,
And
yes.
there was applause, there was tears. So I
Mm.
imagine the difference of connection to the film is vast, just in terms of what we saw. But yeah, brother, like you, I was confused as a youngster watching it, and
Mhm.
didn't really quite make sense of it until later on in my development. But you also hit on some other points that I thought were very powerful. I wanted to ask about your thoughts on what the film leaves out, just in terms of the conversation that the text has. And I think you hit on it, just in terms of the depth of the exploration in the relationship,
Mhm.
the growth, the transformation that the sisters have, whether we're talking Suge Avery, Celie, or Sophia, or even Mary Agnes. So you see the different women in the film, as one interviewer put it, the sisterly bonds that you see that kind of transcend the problems that they encounter.
Mhm.
And then something else that I wanted to speak to that you brought up, and that was just this relationship between our notions of nationalism and our unexamined sexism as black men in particular. And so, like you, brother, when I encountered the film a little bit later, I think during my undergraduate years, I was really in my nationalist phase.
Mhm.
So, as strong as I consider myself to be on the literature on Black nationalism, I was not as strong on the literature on sexism. So, it wasn't until later in my undergraduate years and probably grad school that I really began to solidify my understanding of sexism and the literature on sexism. And the idea, brother, are you ready for this? The idea that sisters had much more to say on the subject of nationalism and sexism together. So, many of the criticisms about the film in the 80s, I was very young when they initially came out, but I remember I took an undergraduate course and we watched The Color Purple. And so, Ishmael Reed, Ed Guerrero, and there were others. And there was an old interview, brother. I don't know if you get a chance to see it. It's on YouTube. It's Huey Newton, Ishmael Reed, and I, I think there's another brother on, and they're talking about The Color Purple.
Okay.
Now, when I saw the interview, I was much more fascinated with what Huey Newton had to say, just in terms of nationalism and consciousness, that I almost forgot I was watching it for The Color Purple purposes. But
Right.
something that you raised, brother, is that it's important for us as men to understand our own sexism as a vehicle for one, be better people, but then two, to get in a place where we can appreciate the critiques of patriarchy and the ways in which it encroaches upon the life chances for Black women. So I think if you read the film as a text, not necessarily as the text, the only text, but if you read it as a text that explores um, one Black woman specifically, but certainly other Black women's stories of healing, reconciliation, as they deal with sexism, as they deal with patriarchy, as they deal with white supremacy, it's not viewed so much as an attack on Black men. And something that you said, I think, is definitely powerful in that you saw the model of healthy Black relationships. So for you, there was no, this makes sense. This is the reality for everybody, because it didn't connect with your lived experience. So my question is, how do you negotiate the reality of The Color Purple with young boys, young men who probably have not had models of healthy Black love, whether it's sister to sister, or in the instance that you mentioned, two people who are married and who have children. Because one of the challenges, and this is part of the conversation I think the film has with contemporary times, one of the challenges sometimes is, if you don't have the model, then how do you create healthier alternatives? And what are some of the ways we can connect with that?
Brother, it's interesting that you say that. That's one of the concerns that I have often had, particularly in the classroom, because my students, they see the film and they believe whatever is in the film. And so I recall having conversations. I teach a course on ethnic racial diversity in society, and I recall having a conversation once about Malcolm X. And my students were saying these things, and I'm like, this never happened. What are you all talking about? And no one had ever really done any reading of Malcolm X. No one had any knowledge of the Nation of Islam. So no one, C.R. Lincoln's Black Muslim in America. No one had read the autobiography of Malcolm X. No one had read Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the original man. No one had done these things. And so at times, that's one of my concerns. And it really does frighten me when others, and black men as well, are seeing these negative images of Black men without that proper context of healthy relationships. And so one of the things that I constantly am trying to focus on, as you say, how do we deal with this when people have not had these images? I have tried to take it up on myself to make sure that I can be that image. And brothers like yourself, who are that image of productive, positive Black men who, as you said, are at least aware of our sexism, right? I can't sit up here and claim, oh, I'm not sexist whatsoever, but who is at least aware of my sexism. And a part of being aware of the sexism is not just saying, yes, I'm aware of my sexism, but actually working to essentially make sure that I'm showing behaviors that reflect that I'm doing my best in terms of dealing with sisters and in terms of dealing with other brothers. That's always brother, that's just such a powerful question that you've asked. That's always my major concern. And I know when I was in my nationalist phase, again, the big argument was, of course, this movie hates black men. This movie is destroying the Black male image. I remember Louis Farrakhan once said, he said that we see all these Black men, these Black women acting fool. He says, but yet, he says, whites are the unseen, all-pervasive reality. And so he gave this whole discourse of, well, look, there's this backdrop or this context that we are not seeing. We don't know what happened prior to this film to essentially socialize these people to engage in the behaviors that they are essentially engaged in. Now, with that being stated, and at that time I said, yes, everything that happened in this movie, you know what? And again, this is when I was 19. I want to make sure I say this, brother, because when other people see this, I don't want them to think I said this now. But this is when I was 19 years old, watching it again for the second time, finally having read the book. I said, yes, this is not Mr. Spark. Mr. D has some bad things, but this is predicated on what had happened to our people in terms of being enslaved. Now, as I got older, I said, okay, great. There is white supremacy. Okay? We need to become aware of this thing. And then I had to begin to step back and say, sisters should be able to tell their stories, and no one should be critical of the sisters for telling their stories. If this is what happens to the sister, this is what happens. We can feel bad about this thing, but in no case should we ever silence that sister because she told the story the way that she told the story and the way that it essentially happened. And so even if I'm not the brother who was doing this, obviously there are brothers who are engaged in these types of behaviors. And so one of the things, again, as being a man, we need to be engaged in conversations with other brothers prior to engaging in these behaviors, or even while they're engaged in these behaviors. One of the things that I do also at the school, it hasn't been running as strong as it historically has. We run what's called a Black male focus group at the school that I'm at, and this is an academic and social support network that I run at the school. And one of the things that we actually talk about, again, is responsibility, and particularly fatherhood and responsibility. And it's very interesting because I've had young brothers who have have literally told me, man, nobody's ever talked to me the way that you talk to me, you know. And in many cases, these young brothers, you know, they say, well, dad's not around, so no man has ever, I want to be proper while I'm on a film here, but no one has ever got in their stuff the way that I get in their stuff,
Okay.
you know.
Okay.
And so I remember one brother, his mother called me, and mom was expressing some things. The brother was just doing some things he shouldn't have been doing. So I saw brother, we went to my office, and we went for a walk. And we went for a walk, and I talked to him in a way that he needed to be spoken to. And the brother actually broke down and started crying. And again, said, Harvell, nobody's talked to me this way before in my life. The brother hugged me, and he told me he needed this thing. The next time I saw this brother, he was graduating with his master's degree, and the brother hugged me again. And you know, he goes through the whole thing. It was all because of me. I said, no, you did this particular thing. And so again, brothers like yourself, brothers like me, have to be dealing with young brothers that are coming up. Brothers, even within our peer group. You know, a lot of times, some of my peers who historically have been my friends, people that I hang out with, I can't engage with them any longer, or I stopped engaging with them in many cases because of their level of sexism, right? A part of me being the man that I am, a part of saying that I recognize my sexism is also challenging other people's sexism. And so as men and as brothers, we need to challenge each other's sexism as well. And so when I say that I don't hang out with them anymore, it's not because I'm saying I don't want to hang out with them. They don't want to hang out with me because those sexist jokes, first of all, I'm not going to laugh. Those jokes are not funny. And I'm going to question you and challenge you on why you're engaged in this type of behavior. So I think in terms of dealing with this brother, it's about us, and we have to take personal responsibility for the Black family, or for our own community, to begin to address these particular issues. Also, one of the things that I always think about, again, when I think about some of the criticisms of the film, tearing down the Black male image, I think, again, some of those criticisms, and this may sound bad, I think that comes from a place of arrogance. Because once again, it says sisters cannot tell their stories, or before sisters tell their stories, they need to come and get it approved by black men. And if it's not approved by us, well then, you know, if we don't approve collectively as Black men. So even though already I may be the brother who has done this behavior to the sister, and maybe the sister is releasing through her writing, I'm telling the sister she can't even have a release through her writing in terms of, Brother Kalvin did these things to me, I want to write about this thing. She has to check with me first. That's problematic on several different levels. And again, as you talked about those for patriarchy, right? We need to check our patriarchy. And that's one of the things that as I got older, the movie made me do. Because yes, again, I still see some of those images. I don't believe they did this to the brothers. I don't believe they made the brothers look like this. And then again, I had to step back and say, but this is that sister story. This is that sister story. Let the sister tell her story. If I want to tell my story, I'll tell the story as well. The difference, of course, in the sister telling her story and the level of abuse is that my story would not be the same. And so I think even with that, right, I'm speaking from a privileged position that I'm saying I cannot talk about that level of abuse, right? That's a privileged position. And so people who speak from privileged positions should never be able to tell the oppressed how they're supposed to mourn, tell the oppressed how they're supposed to deal with and discuss their oppression. And again, I think what was powerful, as you talked about, brothers, those relationships between those sisters, it's something that I drastically missed. And I think my first 3 phases of watching this film. And so it's really sad to say, well, my goodness, my 4th phase, my fatherhood phase, made me realize, my goodness, the relationship between these sisters is something extremely, extremely important. Although, of course, have a model relationship with my daughter needs to have some feminine energy. She needs to deal with other sisters as well, because she needs to see what strong Black women essentially are. And so I can do so much, but she still needs to see this. And so I think in my 4th phase of watching it, those relationships, you know, again, some of them were a little problematic, again, from the movie. But if we look and we actually go back and read the actual text and those particular letters, we see these relationships were nurturing. We see these relationships were loving. We see relationships were certainly compassionate for one another. Even in the film, that when the very last scene where all the sisters are sitting up on the porch, right? You got Suge, Sophia, Squeak, and Celia, they're up on the porch, you know, when Nettie comes back with her children. That was a powerful scene because, again, in the movie you sort of see these conflicts between these women, right? But then to see Sophia and Suge sitting up on the same porch, and they were after the same man. You see Suge and Sophia and Squeak. And then you see Suge and Celie again with the same man, but then they can come back and be on this porch together. That was powerful in and of itself. But again, that clearly shows there's some distinctions between there's some things that were missed from the movie to the film itself.
Absolutely. And I think, you know,
brother, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, not a problem. I think that Hollywood notwithstanding, the film does still maintain some semblance of the connection between the women in the novel. Mm-hmm. And, you know, something that you said, just in reflecting on the movie, I think that's really profound because you have these women who, I mean, think about it. Let's put this in a contemporary context. Kimora Lee Simmons and her ex-husband, Russell Simmons, were in a photo with her current partner and their mm-hmm. children. And this picture was on social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And, you know, I noticed some comments of people saying, wow, he's with his ex-wife and her new man. I don't know if I could do that. What kind of photo is this? What's wrong with Russell? You know, just basically the commentary was suggesting that because your romantic relationship ended with someone, that you can't be friends with them and you can't have these moments with your children. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, if we're talking about love, compassion, healing, and, you know, Black families, that's a bedrock, particularly when we have, you know, so many blended families, and even the concept traditional family. I don't know that ever is applicable because mm-hmm. what is a traditional family? Mm-hmm. You know, there are some folks who have been with their mother and father for most of their life, and come to find out that's not your father, that's your stepdad. Yes. Or you thought your big cousin, your play cousin, was, you know, your cousin, and that's actually your mother. But that's a whole nother conversation. Mm-hmm. But what I think is really powerful is in that film, you see them reconcile, and yes. you see them heal and help each other on their particular journeys. And at the end of the day, you know, you see this strong family that is, you know, blood related, and then of course, you know, the fictive kin type. So I think there's a lot of resilience in the film. And it shows a lot of the inner strength that these women collectively have, and then obviously as individuals. And although it may not be meant this way, one of the things I've been thinking about recently is just the spiritual nature of the film, not necessarily the religious stuff. I mean, you have certainly nods to religion with the juxtaposition between the juke joint and the church scene, which, you know, other commentators have touched out on that. Tyler Perry sloppily has attempted to recreate that. But one of the things I think just on a higher spiritual level is the ways in which these women have engaged in life-saving. So you mentioned the letters, the education, the coming to consciousness, the learning how to read, Celie and Nettie, and then this communication between those letters, because for a moment in the film, they don't know if they're going to communicate with each other. Mm-hmm. You know, her sister is writing these letters, and Celie is feeling like she's in the world by herself. And then her and Suge make the discovery, and it's like, wow, you know, the whole time she's been writing me. And as I've been growing, maturing, she's been doing the same thing. And so it's like there's this reconnection and a way for them to, in some ways, visualize what has always been present, and that's their spiritual bond. So it's one of those things where I don't know if she's getting these letters, but I'm going to trust my consciousness, my spirit, my gut, whatever, however you want to word it, that I'm going to keep doing this because I know at some point things are going to turn out. And then over the course of the film, you see that they do reunite. They are connected. She meets her children. And one of the strong features, I think, that the film does not show is the way in which her and Mr. are able to reconcile. Yes. And that's something that, you know, I think about this, and I'm interested in your thoughts, is, you know, how does that work in terms of Hollywood film production, to have a Black woman and a Black man reconcile and have a loving relationship, not necessarily romantic, yes, but in the sense that I respect you, and I recognize the way that I treated you was problematic and is wrong, and I ask for your forgiveness. And that this woman who could easily say, you know what, I don't have to forgive you. I don't even have to talk to you. If I do, it's too soon. But what she's able to do is to recognize that, you know, I can forgive you. I have that capacity. I have that ability to forgive you for what you've done. And it's not necessarily for Mr. It helps her in her healing, but he does benefit from the fact that she's able to forgive him. And I think that that's a profound kind of acknowledgement. And so often we're encouraged to just forgive without deconstructing how we got to that place. So, you know, just, you know, again, contemporary nod, everyone's so quick to say, oh, forgive, 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 forgive. You know, this happened. This person was killed. This person was assaulted. Oh, just forgive it. But there's no willingness to engage. Well, how did we get here? And yes, forgiveness is critical. It's important. But let's really unpack how we got here. And as you said earlier, are we willing to engage in some of our sexist behavior and unpack that stuff so that we can not just get to the point where we need to be forgiven, but we can get to the point where the behavior is altered. So, you know, I find myself saying, you know, I'm less interested in apologies and more interested in corrective behavior. So there's no need for an apology. So, you know, it seems as though every few minutes some entertainer, celebrity, pundit, politician, whatever is apologizing. And so we've got to get to a point where, I mean, apologies are wonderful if they're well-intended, sincere. However, the behavior should adjust. So there's no need for that. If I treat you respectfully as a colleague, as a brother and a friend, then I have no need to apologize to you because I've been honorable in my interactions with you the whole time. So, you know, the film, I think, and I think this is where a lot of heat comes, is that it doesn't show the whole story. And so people have been critical of Steven Spielberg. You know, why is he directing it? How come the film didn't get any awards? All this kind of discourse. But I think for what it does do, it does show some of those redemptive aspects of the relationship. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are in terms of, do you feel like the film does indeed offer some moments of redemption? And how different is that from the text in terms of your read of it?
Right. That's a powerful question, brother. Particularly as you one of your first statements that you made is in terms of could the reconciliation work for Hollywood? And I think no, it cannot work for Hollywood. Even though, again, I'm saying that sisters, you know, they should be able to tell their stories. I think with Hollywood comes in, there cannot be at the end of a film the showing of a healthy relationship between a black man and a black woman, particularly when the black woman is going to forgive him for some things that, my goodness. I know that I have to work on my sense of being able to forgive, as you were saying, you know, show me the true behavior. That's one thing that I've never been able to do, brother. Once I've been done wrong, I have some serious issues. And so for her to have forgiven him. In fact, I know one of my favorite quotes from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is that if there is no God, the only thing left to worship would be the black woman. And I'm sorry, that's a heavy statement, because the sister was able to forgive him for all the foolishness and all the heartache that he put her through. That must be God, because I know I could not. Look, brother, I know I could not do it. Look, brother just hit me once. There is no forgiving. You know, one of my favorite quotes. Oh my gosh. Oh boy, one of my favorite quotes from the scripture. People used to get frustrated with me from this particular quote. But my favorite quote from the Bible is, "Just as you have delighted in taking our blood, you should be giving your own blood to drink like water." And I'm sorry, there is no forgiving when it comes to me. And so, but I look at that woman and what she went through, that is truly God, that she could deal with the forgiveness. But no, Hollywood cannot. They cannot engage in that type of imagery on the film, right? So in the movie, certainly there's this redemptive scene. Okay, he goes down, he pays money, they see him riding on the horse away. And I got this whole notion of the old cowboy movies, right, where the person rides their horse off into the sunset. And so the movie sort of leads us where he rides his horse off into the sunset. Celia is reunited with her children, and the world is okay. No, this woman still has some emotional scars. And the question is, was she able to deal with these things? How now does she begin to negotiate those misyears with her child? Please forgive me if I'm thinking of another film. 12 Years a Slave did the same thing, right? I remember talking with some people, and in fact, at this time, I did see the movie. It was in a black theater, and I remember talking with some people afterwards. And people were just excited. Well, he's no longer enslaved, and he got to see his family. I said, wait a second. But when he left, his kids were 6, 7, 8 years old. He comes back, and now his children, he has a grandchild. What about all those years that this man has essentially missed? There's nothing that can take away. I'm sorry. There's nothing that can repay or replace those particular years. And so I just keep thinking about, so we bring this back. I'm sorry, but then so people were happy about this, and they were happy about this in terms of, well, everything is okay. No, everything is not okay. Those 12 years that man was in bondage is problematic. Not just that particular man, but what about the brothers that he left down there? And so it's like this feel-good thing. And so again, Hollywood, to feel good in Hollywood is not going to be feel good for us as black people. So the feel-good movie, at the end, they do the me and you, us, never apart, right? And they did that, and he rides off on his horse, and the movie is done. Everybody feels good. Let's go home. We still do not address what has happened throughout that particular movie, how that is not going to impact her, how has it impacted and will it impact the relationship between her and her children. And as you said, if he really redeems himself in terms of the film, well, what are his relationships with now? So the next time he goes looking for a woman, as I said, when I was a kid, it would seem problematic to me that the man just shows up. He has on a nice suit and he looks all clean and sharp, but he shows up to Celie's house. I want your daughter Nettie. I was not prepared for that. And for the father to say, you can't have Nettie, but you can have Celie. She's ugly. I said, what in the world is happening here? But again, I was very, 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 very young at that particular time. And so the question now becomes, as you're saying, what does Mr. now do? Does he truly change his behavior, or I ride off into the sunset and I'm still a bad person? And I think that is problematic. Hollywood is not prepared to address that and truly show any type of real reconciliation. Because I still say this, although I do have issues, and yes, as black men, we have to take responsibility for our foolishness that we have perpetuated against our sisters. I still say this, Hollywood does want to destroy the black male image and the black family. So as you said, within the text, them coming back together, no, we cannot deal with that in a Hollywood film. Another thing I think is important, brother, and you brought this up, and this is, when you brought up that whole spiritual piece, brother, that spiritual piece is so valuable. And the movie does some interesting things with the spiritual piece. And for people who don't particularly have a clear understanding of our culture, I think they miss a great deal of that. And so, with particularly, as you said, they juxtapose the church with the juke joint. And for me, it's funny because, I think Muddy Waters puts it best. He said, the blues is my religion. And so for me, I'm a blues man, brother. I'm a blues man. The juke joint is the church. And in fact, for many of us, the juke joint is better than the church. And I know that's going to get some flack when I make that statement, but let me explain. And this is going to sound bad. The church is not always open. When I need some redemption, when I need people, brothers and sisters, to come and sit with me and talk with me, when I need to just be around some people, right? I'm going through a thing and I need to be around some people. The church doors are not always open. So the church is great on Sunday and Wednesday night for the prayer meeting and Tuesday night for, I'm not sure, you have to forgive me, it's been many moons since I've been, okay? But I know that the juke house is open every single day. In fact, brother, I remember this a couple years ago, one of the places that I attend, okay, again, I'm a sociologist, but I'm still a human being. I do my teaching, I do my thing in the classroom, but I still have to have a time as well. But I remember one time I went to my church, and that's a juke joint, and sister had lost her husband, okay? It's a Tuesday night, and you're thinking, my goodness, it's a Tuesday night, sister lost her husband, the brother, I think, passed, they said about 4, okay? Tuesday nights, we open up at 7 o'clock. And again, I'm thinking about, as you said, the spiritual piece. We open up at 7 o'clock. Many people would be critical of that sister and say, what is she doing at a juke joint? At 7 o'clock, she just lost her husband at 4. The church was not open. The church was not open on Tuesday at 7. And brother, I remember being in there And I remember everybody checking on her, making sure she was okay, people bringing her water, et cetera, et cetera. And I never forget this scene, brother. There was a song that came on called That's How Strong My Love Is by Little Milton. And the sister just stood up and started rocking. And he got to this point, he says, if I was a fish who's been cast up on the land, he said, I would stay up there if you let me hold your hand. He said, I could be the wind from a rolling strong storm. He said, I stop blowing if you just let me walk you home. The sister shouted. And brother, it took me back to being 5 years old and sitting in the Baptist church. The sister shouted and started screaming and waving her hands as if she was in a church scene. And when I was 5, my mother was the member of the usher board. And I remember people shouting that a song would come on and they would be singing and shouting. And then the women would all rush and the mothers would all rush to the sister just to make sure they didn't fall out and go and just calm them down. Brother, I had not seen that scene in 30 some odd years, but it was literally a recreation of the church. And they all went to the sister and they talked with her and they held her. And we're talking about, the relationships between the women in the film and in the book. These relationships, they came together, and you wouldn't, if you had walked into this place, you would have thought, my goodness, this is a church service that is happening here. And they held her and they sat with her and she cried. She cried for about 30, 40 some odd minutes. And the blues just played and everybody just was concerned about her. And we sat there as a family. And in fact, I was talking about, again, the relationship between the church and the juke joint. It becomes also very, very powerful. I know when I go to my place that I go to, I feel like I'm at a family reunion. There was once, brother, I didn't show up for about a month. I had been on vacation. And I'm getting calls from the people asking me, what's going on? Where you at? Are you okay? Do we need to come check on you? And I walked through the door and it was like it was a family reunion. And then I juxtapose this when I talk to people who are in the church and they talk about how the church has changed, particularly elders. I was talking to an elder and the elder was telling me, he says, yes, years ago, if you didn't show up, the ushers would call you, the pastor would call you. If you were in the hospital, they would come and visit you. Says now that's not happening whatsoever. If you don't show up, nobody seems to essentially care. And I was thinking about, wow, my juke house is my church. This is a place where I go. I'm talking with elders of the community. I'm talking with my peers. And this relationship, again, is like a family relationship. In fact, we all call each other family. Wherever we essentially go, it is our particular family. And so again, as you said, that juke joint scene, the first one where Suge Avery, and again, this is powerful too. And well, I'm sorry, you might have given me on a blues tangent here, but it's powerful, brother, because Suge Avery is a blues woman. And so one of the interesting critiques, people talk, I was reading a critique once, they were talking about her and her lifestyle and the whole notion of her coming into the house with Celie and living, with Mr., who later found out his name is actually Albert, I think, right? And the person was saying, what kind of woman would do this thing? Now, I'm not saying that this is what blues women do, but if you critically begin to listen to the lyrics and the songs that the people are perpetuating, well, this is a part of the culture. Again, not to steal anybody's man, but when you talk about blues culture, this is what is essentially happening in terms of the music. Now, how much the art reflects reality, or reality reflects the art, I cannot essentially say. And then, of course, and I can always, and again, I'm thinking about the song that she wrote for me, Celie. Sister, you've been on my mind. Sister with two of a kind. Just that. The song, she called her sister. I think that's powerful. She could have used any word. She could have used any other word to describe this particular woman, but she chose to call her sister. And she says, you've been on my mind. And then the whole notion of them being in this place at the end, where she was singing, sister, you've been on my mind. And then God is trying to tell you something's going on at the church. And they were battling. There was this duel between this blues and the gospel song. And again, for those of us who understand the culture, this has always been a duel between the blues and the gospel. I remember hearing stories from the elders, particularly blues men who would get in trouble because Saturday night, usually early into Sunday morning, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, their out singing the blues at the juke joint. And then, at 9 o'clock, they're supposed to be coming in so they can play the piano for the church. And one brother in particular telling me how he'd always get in trouble with his mother because he never seemed to make it in time to play the piano for the church, or he would make it in time, but he smelled like corn whiskey, and that was always an issue as well. But again, I think that was a powerful scene in terms of the film, brother, because again, for many of us, the blues is our religion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think you said it eloquently, and I think that the larger piece, sometimes the spiritual piece, is missed because of the religious signification. So
yes,
when we're stuck on a particular way religion should appear and feel, we miss the spiritual energy that is all around.
Yes,
so I was certainly, again, like you, in the different phases of understanding and watching this film, I don't think I picked that up at the first run. I think my first run was, okay, they're at the bad place. Now they're in church and everything's good. But then again, as you begin to develop, some understanding about things, particularly patriarchy, it's interesting because I think the film scholar in me looks at it as, at the end of the day, patriarchy is right. Mm-hmm. So you can go off, you can do your sister thing, but you make redemption with your father. I mean, literally, Shug goes in and reconciles with her father, and then we could extend that to religion. She's now in the house of God. So she's done right by institutional patriarchy. So now we can end the film. But I think, again, reading the book and then watching the film, and then, brother, even seeing the play, I think the play does an excellent job at showing you the relationship between Celie and Shug and showing how they love each other. Because like you, brother, watching the film, particularly when they kiss, I was like, well, I don't understand. What is this about? I don't get this. And so my mother, had to walk me through their relationship and explain it to me, which at the time I just didn't have. I couldn't make the connection because there was, again, too much going on for me and my young mind at the time. You have this woman who's supposed to be married, but he doesn't treat her nice. He beats her up, but they're married. But there's this other woman he's in love with, but then she's washing and scrubbing her down. And it was just confusing. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that the film does is certainly shows you the complicated nature of relationships and that life is messy. It's not essentially here's this person and here's this person. They hook up and it's happily ever after. And I think the film deals in the gray area for majority of the time. And the novel certainly does as well. And this is where people live. People live in these complexities and in these interesting spaces. You're married to one person, but you're in love with somebody else. Mm-hmm. But that somebody else doesn't want to be married to you, but they don't mind spending time with you or something of that nature. I mean, it's just the complexities of life. And I think the film does negotiate some of that pretty well for all the other issues in terms of Hollywood, in terms of what we can negotiate on screen and off screen in the worlds of Hollywood filmmaking. And I always say this quote throughout this process. Holly Jarima, filmmaker, often says, Hollywood is the plantation. Mm-hmm. If you want freedom stories, you got to get off the plantation. So that's one of the thoughts that I often return to when I critique Hollywood cinema, because, at the end of the day, there's only certain stories that may or may not be told. And, a point you made earlier just about, the privileged space of the oppressor. In fairness, I have not seen the movie Straight Outta Compton, but in all the reviews and all the critiques, it does not deal with the issue of violence against women. And I'm just returning to your quote, the oppressor does not have to negotiate that. And that's one of the privileges of being in that position. I don't have to talk about violence against women. It's not important to me. It's not on my agenda. I don't have to talk about it. And what's really interesting is by leaving out that conversation, and I'm not just singling out that film because there are countless others, but in leaving out that conversation, we can continue with the narrative that, that's not a significant part of revolutionary struggle. We don't need to engage sexism. That's, as they said, during the period of the 60s, that, that's not a Black woman issue, which obviously a lot of sisters and hopefully some conscientious brothers did too. But yeah, definitely. I think the film, for what it's worth, 30 years later, stands as a testament to really as much as it's possible through the lens of Spielberg, a piece of Black feminism critique. So is there, as we wrap this up, I wanted to know, is there anything that I did not ask that you definitely wanted to speak to in our time together here on Purple Points?
Brother, I will just say one more point, because as you're both reflecting about 30 years later, and I keep thinking about, this 30 years ago, my first time seeing it, I do want to share one thing. I do recall, as I said, I was confused, but I do recall not quite understanding the few white individuals that were in the film and the way that our people were not being treated by them, but the way that our people interacted with them. At my young age, I could not understand it. The way that history had been taught in school was that there was enslavement, and then Martin Luther King came along, and everything was cool. Okay, and so there's this discourse, and there's a disconnect. I think the way the history is taught in school. Not I think that there is a disconnect where you have enslavement, and then there's Martin Luther King. There all these years they just pass, and so at the time period of that movie, I didn't understand. Particularly, I remember the thing that really bothered me, Miss Sophia, Oprah Winfrey's character, when the white woman, Miss, I can't think of her name, but Millie or something like that, said, "Your children are so clean. Would you like to be my maid?" And Sophia says, "Hell no." And so she says, "I'm sorry, but what'd you say to her?" And so she slapped her. The white woman slapped her. And it was profound, because I'm looking at this white woman, and I'm looking at Sophia's size, okay, and not truly having a clear understanding of the dynamics of power that were operating in terms of Black and white dynamic, in terms of white supremacy overall. All I'm saying is, Sophia is a nice sized woman. Millie, I'm sorry, you're in trouble. That's what I'm thinking about. I was always a big kid myself, right? And in fact, I remember people used to bully me, until I realized how to, this is going to sound bad, but how to properly use my weight, right? So people are bullying me, but if I used to always say, when I was a child, I was always big, and big as an adult as well. I used to be almost 400 pounds, and I used to always joke and say, you have to be exact if you think you're going to stop 400 pounds of man when he's rushing you. And that's what I used to say. And so even when I was a child, people would bully me, and I'm fat and I'm this, that, and the other. And of course, just really quickly going back to the blues, one of my favorite songs, he said, when you look at me, don't dare call me fat. It says I'm built for comfort, not built for speed. I won't say the rest of it, but that's another story, I think, brother. And so I used to say, look, I'm built for comfort. I'm not fat at all. I'm built for comfort. I'm not built for speed. And I won't say the rest. But so when I learned how to use my weight, needless to say, people stopped bullying me. So not understanding white supremacy and the Black-white dynamic. She slapped this woman. I said, "Oh, Sophia about to whoop her," and she knocked her out. But all the men around are saying, Lawrence Fishburne, "No, Sophia, no." And even when her husband, or the man that she was with at that time, started saying, "Can you pump the crude fast?" They were at a gas station, and so she did it. And all these white men show up, then yelling at this sister and going crazy on this sister. And I couldn't understand why none of the brothers made a move whatsoever. I couldn't understand, brother, and I'm young. I couldn't understand why none of the brothers made a move whatsoever. I'm sitting there saying, wait a minute, all these brothers are standing around here, and you have 6, 7 folks going to attack this sister, and no one's going to do anything, right? And then the next scene, they show Sophia in jail. Bro, this was profound and problematic for a child to understand. I'm looking at this notion of this woman hit her first. She hit the woman back. What is she doing in jail, right? So we have this whole discourse in school. When I went to school, brothers, the first year that I started school was the first year they started busing in my city, and there was this whole notion of being bussed out to the white school was going to be a better school. So one of the things we constantly learned at the white school, that the police are our friends, the police are our friends, the police are our friends. So this is my reality. The police are our friends. And so to show this sister in jail, I'm done. What is she in jail for? And no one could explain it to me. Now, of course, when I got home and talked with my mom and dad about it, both of them grew up in the South. And again, I'm not trying to be critical of the South. As Malcolm said, whenever you are north of the Canadian line, you are in the South. But particularly talking to my mom and dad, and particularly my dad. My mom came north when she was like 5, but dad grew up there till he was 18 years old. And dad began to explain this thing to me. It was at that moment, brother, that I really, it blew my mind when dad explained to me that even though she hit that woman first, because now my dad said because she was black, she's the one that went to jail. Now, of course, as I've gotten older, and I'm not critiquing my father, I realized it wasn't because she was black that she went to jail. Because of global white supremacy, she went to jail.
Okay.
It was not her. It was not her blackness that caused her to go to jail. Right? Being black and engaged in an activity of self-defense does not cause you to go to jail. Global white supremacy is what causes you to go to jail from being black and just walking down the street, but we won't get into that. And so I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out. I mean, there was one other scene, brother, when we see him engage with someone white. It was the mailman. And I just couldn't help but think of how nice he was to the mailman, right? Your wife is called, well, your wife who you do your business on is calling you Mr. And everybody's afraid of you, and you rule with an iron fist in the household over your children. But the white mailman, who again, you could probably whoop him 4 or 5 times before he could get back into his postal car. You call him Mr. and you offer him cookies, and it just baffled me again from my young age. And so again, white supremacy is there, and as Louis Farrakhan said, whiteness is the unseen, all-pervasive reality. And so now again, I can wrap my mind around this thing. Global white supremacy, the all-seeing, unpervasive reality. And so as you say, as we finish it up, and again, I hope I haven't went too long, brother. I do want to tell you, I thank you so much for being able to talk to you, brother. This is a wonderful thing that you're doing overall, brother. And again, I'm always in awe of your scholarship, and still trying to follow in this wonderful path that you have led us, that you have laid for us, brother.
Brother, I just want to echo your compliments, man. I appreciate what you're doing. From our days, the focus group when we were in grad school, young 20-somethings trying to wrap our heads around consciousness, and here we are, man. I won't reveal any ages, but we'll say in the later seasons, brother. We'll say later seasons, but still at it. And I appreciate your scholarship and the warrior scholar spirit, and the fire of Khalid Muhammad that still burns, brother. And so I appreciate that, and I'm glad that you could be a part of Purple Points. And thank you for your time. And so for those of you who are watching, thank you for tuning in to this edition of Purple Points.